And welcome back to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from a real, honest, genuine perspective. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 100. Yes, it's a milestone. Not that anybody cares, but we made it all the way to 100 episodes. In this 100th episode, we're kicking things off with a bang. We're going to preview the Cincinnati Bengals' upcoming Week 5 home matchup against the Detroit Lions. Just up the interstate on I-75 in Michigan, Detroit Lions come to Cincinnati and Paycor Stadium with a record of 3-1, and they have won 3 games in a row. They started off with a loss at Green Bay to the Packers, but then since then, they put a beatdown on the Chicago Bears, 52-21, in what was their former offensive coordinator's kind of homecoming, Ben Johnson coming back and playing his old team in Detroit. And reporters going into the season were asking the Detroit coaches, oh, you guys lost your offensive coordinator, you lost your defensive coordinator, you lost a bunch of other assistants. What are you guys going to do? And I think they kind of took that a little bit personally. The coaches that they still had and the players that they still had say, hey, it wasn't all about those guys who left. We're still here. We're still pretty good. And they have proved that, winning 3 in a row. They went to Baltimore and won on Monday night against the Ravens in an entertaining game, 38-30. And then most recently, they beat the Browns 34-10, got a couple interceptions on Joe Flacco, ended up getting him inevitably benched after that game. But Lions right now lead the NFL in scoring. They're the number one scoring offense. And we'll take a little look at some of the statistics between these two teams. It's interesting now that we've got like all the advanced statistics on NFL Pro. Anybody with a NFL Pro subscription can go on there and check out all those stats to see some of the things that might not just jump out when you look at the records for either one of these two teams, including the Bengals. Now, if you have been living under a rock, maybe you weren't following the team, I've got bad news. Bengals have got off to a bit of an up and down start. They won the first 2 games in less than convincing fashion. You could say they got lucky, at least on that Browns game, especially where the kicker missed 2 critical kicks and the Bengals ended up winning by 1 point. That was a bit of luck. And then the Jaguars game, Jaguars just dropped a bunch of passes. They had that one wrapped up. If they could have just caught that pass on 4th down, game would have been theirs. Bengals had 2 wins, got off to that hot start, that fast start they've been talking about. They all training camp. What did we hear? Fast start. We're going to get off to a faster start. They started practice in the morning instead of the afternoon to start the day off fast. That all went to shit when Joe Burrow's toe got injured, his left toe. He's had surgery. He is now rolling around the locker room on some kind of scooter, and he's got, a cast on his foot. He's immobile. He's not doing anything active anywhere. He's not anywhere close to coming back. And that's what I said. People say, oh, it's just a 3-month rehab. He can come back. He's not coming back. He's not going to come back. He can't even walk at this point, and people think he's going to come back and save the season somehow. Like I said, that's just a weird coping mechanism. A lot of people, and the it's good for business, I suppose. Like I said, Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles. Everybody knows he's not going to come back from a torn Achilles in one season, especially at his age. But the Jets were still trying to, sell that to the fans to give them some hope. Stay interested in the season. Don't just tune off, because that is a very real possibility for what could happen with the Bengals. Now, they've lost 2 in a row, and they did it about as bad as you could do in 2 back-to-back games. We had the game against the Vikings, 2 backup quarterbacks, Carson Wentz and Jake Browning, going up against each other. And it was like, okay, how are the Bengals going to do without Joe Burrow? Answer, not good. It was 48-10. 2 defensive touchdowns scored against the Bengals in that game. And then, all right, Zac Taylor said, hey, 5 turnovers in a game. Can't win a game like that. That was an anomaly. That was out of the ordinary to have 5 turnovers. We're not going to do that again. Certainly the next game will be way better. Well, Denver Broncos, they didn't force any turnovers against Jake Browning or this team. The Bengals didn't fumble any. I don't think they fumbled even once. They didn't have any interceptions, but unfortunately, the results didn't get any better. They lost 28-3, 76-13 in the last 2 games. And they're teetering on irrelevance. You hear people talking about, well, season's over for the Bengals. Now that Joe Burrow's injured, Jake Browning looks like crap. Bengals may not win another game because the schedule is very difficult this year. There's not a lot of easy last place looking teams on their schedule, especially not the next few that they've got coming up. So people are not talking about the Bengals. Or if they are talking about the Bengals, people like Mike Florio on Pro Football Talk are trying to speak into existence this idea that the Bengals are going to trade for another quarterback. He really wants them to trade for Russell Wilson. Like, Russell Wilson hasn't looked like complete garbage every team he's played on in the last 4 years. Like, he played for the Broncos. They got rid of him as soon as possible. As soon as they could get out of their contract with Russell Wilson, he was gone. He went with the Steelers last year. He lasted 1 season. He looked like garbage, and they got rid of him. Then he went to the Giants. He lasted all of, 3 games? And then he was throwing a ball out of the back of the end zone on 4th and goal to basically lose the game for the Giants. So he got benched there. Why would the Bengals want Russell Wilson? He's been a loser. They don't want anybody coming in who doesn't know the offense, costing them more money, and then he's just going to lose them more games. They can lose plenty of games with Jake Browning. They don't need any help, all right? And besides that, in his midweek press conference this week. I'm recording this on Thursday. Zac Taylor just did his Wednesday press conference yesterday. He reiterated his support behind Jake Browning as their starting quarterback. He said he's got supreme confidence in Jake Browning. They don't need to bring in anybody else from the outside. They feel really good about Jake Browning, and he's a winning quarterback. He's won games for them in the past, and they're going to do what they need to do, make the corrections to get right back on the right track. It is true Jake Browning did win some games when Joe Burrow got injured, but they didn't make the playoffs. They didn't win enough games to really do much of anything. He was 4-3. He exceeded expectations in that they didn't lose every single game. He did win a handful of games. He went 1 game, half a game over 500, so that's good. But that was 2 years ago. He's 2 years older. He apparently, he hasn't gotten any more athletic. His arm hasn't gotten any stronger in those last 2 years. And I went back and saw some clips. I watched a little bit of the All-22 film. I have to take back my initial defense, or I'll soften my defense of Jake Browning here. I still say it's not all Jake Browning's fault, and it's kind of an uninformed take by people who don't really watch the Bengals, who would say, oh, it's all Jake Browning's fault. Once they got rid of Joe Burrow, they put Jake Browning in, and he's just terrible, and the team can't do anything. Well, like they said on Monday Night Football, Joe Burrow doesn't play on the punt team. So when Ryan Rico is kicking 24-yard punts, shanking them out of bounds, and they're getting delay of game penalties like on back-to-back plays, and just the whole operation is looking totally disjointed, that is not all to do with Joe Burrow. And that's not all to do with Jake Browning either. Some of that is just on the coaching, the preparation, the focus, whatever you want to call it. As a team, the Bengals are disappointing, underperforming, frustrating. They're not getting, from an ownership perspective, I wouldn't feel like I was getting what I paid for in all those massive contracts that they gave out to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson in the offseason. Not that they're not trying. They're obviously out there playing and trying to live up to those expectations, but it's just not happening. How much of that is to blame on Zac Taylor? It's hard to say because when you go back and look, there were plays where Ja'Marr Chase was open. So they were scheming players open. They were getting opportunities to make plays. It's just that Jake Browning was missing a lot of those opportunities. He was passing them up and making decisions almost too quickly. He was deciding where to throw the ball basically before the snap even happened. So as soon as he got the ball, it was just catch, throw, pretty much. He wasn't reading the defenses. He wasn't trying to read the defenders and their body language and seeing who's going to be open and who isn't. It was more, I like this matchup one-on-one down the sidelines with T. Higgins, and I'm just going to throw it deep and see what happens. Maybe we'll get defensive pass interference. Maybe he'll catch it. He was very careful, overly cautious about keeping the ball out of the middle of the field, because that's where obviously balls can get intercepted if you throw it over the middle of the field versus throwing it to the sideline. But the thing was, Jake Browning was throwing it like 5 yards out of bounds where nobody had a chance to catch it. The defense couldn't intercept it. That's good. But you also need to give your teammate a chance to catch it. Otherwise, it's just a completely wasted play. And that was one of the things that really annoyed me the most about Andy Dalton, especially in his later years. It seemed like it was a lot of the things we saw Jake Browning do against the Broncos on Monday night, where Andy Dalton, he would get flushed out of the pocket, scramble, and then just throw the ball like 10 yards out of bounds. Complete waste of a play. Nothing. I mean, it wasn't a loss, it wasn't a sack, it wasn't an incomplete pass, it wasn't an interception, but an incomplete pass where nobody even had a chance to catch it from your team is a waste of everybody's time, basically. That's what contributed to a lot of the Bengals' struggles on offense last Monday. I don't want to keep dwelling on the past and dwelling on previous games, but after that first drive that the Bengals had, they had basically no success on offense. It was shocking how much like the script flipped on the Bengals. Everything was looking pretty decent in that first drive, and then after that, nothing. They didn't even get it into Denver territory. They got it close to the 50-yard line a couple times, but then they had like a holding penalty or a false start or delay of game or something that would move them back, and then they would have to punt. And so it's been a continuous question with the Bengals coaching, specifically Zac Taylor, because he's the head of the offense. He doesn't know anything about defense, as we have established many times. Zac Taylor doesn't take any credit or blame for the defense. He puts that all on the shoulders of the defensive coordinator. If they ask him a question related to the defense, he barely has any clue, honestly, when you listen to some of these answers. Not that he gives good answers ever. Everything Zac Taylor says is like cut, paste from any other previous Zac Taylor press conference. And it's frustrating and maddening and almost nauseating to listen to Zac Taylor come up in front of the reporters and give the same answers week after week. They're the same questions. The reporters keep asking, why can't you run the football? Why is the offense not scoring any points? Why is Jake Browning not as good as Joe Burrow? And I understand Zac Taylor's not going to sell out his players and his team and say, yeah, these guys aren't that good. They suck. They didn't get ready to play. That was one of the things that Ja'Marr Chase pointed out, is he said he didn't think the offense wanted it enough, and they got to want it more. And they asked Zac Taylor, what did he think of those comments from Ja'Marr Chase about the team not wanting it enough? And then Zac Taylor tried to totally change the subject and say, oh, well, I love Ja'Marr. He's a competitor, and I wouldn't change anything about Ja'Marr. He's done such a great job, blah, 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 blah. Did not answer the question about the team not wanting it, not being ready, not having the desire to go out and beat the opponent. He completely sidestepped that. And that is the fact that they weren't ready to play. He did not confirm nor deny because it's hard to argue. If the team gets beat 28-3, it's hard to say, oh yeah, we came out ready to play, ready to hit those guys in the mouth, and things just didn't go our way. No, if you get beat 28-3 and 48-10 in back-to-back weeks, it's obvious to everybody that they didn't come ready to play. They didn't have a good game plan on either side of the ball. Defense gave up over 500 yards. Offense, 159. One of the largest margins or discrepancies between yards between two teams you're ever going to see, the largest margin this season. And in the past 2 games, they've been outgained by like 535 yards combined. Not to mention 63 points and 500 and something yards. So just 2 complete no-shows by this team. And so playing the Lions, who are coming in on a 3-game streak, they're feeling good. They have 1 day of extra rest because the Lions and the Browns played last Sunday. Bengals played on Monday night and got back early on Tuesday morning, had Tuesday off, and then a lighter Wednesday walk-through practice. So it's going to be less time to get prepared. That's basically, more than 24 hours extra preparation time between the Lions and the Bengals. So that's another disadvantage for this Bengals team. Now, they are going to be playing at home, Paycor Stadium, and they're going to have the fan advantage, supposedly. Zac Taylor talked so much about how in their previous 2 games they were on the road, how much an advantage those home teams had. So now there's no more excuse about being on the road and the crowd noise and all that stuff. They need to figure out how to get the play calls in quicker, how to get substitutions on and off the field so that they're not having to call timeouts. That was one of the things. Bengals had to use a timeout because they had 12 people on the field on defense at one point. There was another point where they had 10 people on the field on defense, and then the Broncos scored a touchdown because they had guys running on the field late, not knowing what to do, who's covering who. Like, the guys on defense were pointing at each other, like, are you covering him? What are we doing? Nobody seemed to have any clue what was going on, and it showed because the Broncos just ran right all over them. Similar issues on offense. Delay of game, false start, holding, not getting lined up on the line of scrimmage like you're supposed to, taking away a big gain. The only long pass that the Bengals completed was to T. Higgins for like 37 yards, but it got wiped out by an Amarius Mims illegal formation penalty. They're going to have to correct those mistakes. And in theory, being at home should make it that much easier to get things accomplished. Assuming, the fans should be quiet and respectful. But if things start going in a bad direction, I would imagine those fans are going to get restless. The home crowd, they are fickle, and they pay a lot of money. They're paying attention. They're spending their time, their energy, getting ready for this game. They're doing the stripe the jungle. So they're going to have orange and black alternating sections in the stadium. They've done this before, and it looked pretty good, honestly, on TV. It's going to be a 4:25 Fox matchup, so it's going to be late afternoon going into that early evening. They're going to have the lights on. It's going to get a little bit dark, so that should make it look on camera pretty good, just that orange and black contrast. And since it's that Fox 4:25 game, that means they're going to have the Kevin Burkhardt, Tom Brady announce crew. Let's hope that Tom Brady is better than what I've seen him in the past games, but I don't have a lot of hope because Tom Brady, he's a good football player, not so great as a broadcaster, and part of that is because since he's part owner of the Raiders, he is basically a competitor for all these other teams, so he's not allowed to go to certain production meetings or calls, and they've kind of changed some of the rules about that, but whatever. That's not going to be the most important thing in this game. They're going to be focusing probably on Jared Goff and the Lions, I would imagine, if they start winning, because at this point, it's a bad place to be as a Bengals fan because you're not getting the love. You're also not getting the hate. You're just being ignored. You feel like, as a Bengals fan, the team has just kind of drifted off into irrelevance, which is the worst place to be. And this is supposed to be an entertainment business. This is supposed to be, like I say all the time, the WWE, wrestling, Royal Rumble. The Bengals, if this were the Royal Rumble, it feels like the Bengals already got tossed out like in the first 5 minutes. And they didn't even get a chance to pull off their special move or, their signature anything. they just got, like, as soon as they got into the ring, somebody picked them up and threw them right back out. And it's deflating because, I'm standing there in the crowd with my Joe Burrow fat head or whatever. I don't know. I'm taking this wrestling analogy too far, but you get the point. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be something you look forward to watch with your friends, your family, or just go on social media and be a social media weirdo during the game. But however you want to be a fan, however you want to watch, if you are a fan and you're still watching at this point, you probably are somewhat hardcore and you get excited. You get excited when the time is ticking down towards kickoff. The anticipation is building, and that's part of the fun. But when you're anticipating the team losing by multiple scores, like the Bengals going into this game are 10.5-point underdogs at home. It's the biggest margin between the betting spreads of any team, any game this week. Now, this is a betting podcast, but the Bengals were the Bengals were 7.5-point underdogs last Monday to the Broncos. And obviously they lost by 25, so that would have been a good bet on the Broncos. And I was tempted to, honestly, but I don't gamble, I don't bet. And it felt kind of dirty to bet against your team because I want the team to win, but I was like, there's no way that the Bengals are going to stick within 7.5 points of the Broncos. And 10.5 points in the NFL, that's a pretty wide margin. But given the fact that the Bengals have lost by 38 and 25 in their last two games, that could also be a pretty good bet. You never know. Maybe Jake Browning has some sort of revelation where he's able to suddenly read defenses better and not get flustered immediately. But part of it is, it's not just like Jake Browning standing back there playing 7-on-7. Part of it is there is a defensive pass rush coming at him, ready to hit him. And it's easy to stand back there and throw the ball around. Or it's even easier to be one of these people on YouTube who are like dissecting the plays and doing a film breakdown like they know anything about football. And they're like, oh, well, Jake Browning should have thrown the ball here and Jake Browning should have done this. It's very easy when you're sitting at home, with a mouse and keyboard in your hand saying, having never played football in your life, couldn't throw a football probably 30 yards, but these guys are like, oh, Jake Browning should throw the ball here. He should do this. He should do that. Never mind the fact that there's like a 6'5", 280-pound guy diving at Jake Browning's knees while he's trying to make all these decisions. It's harder than it looks. And so I'm not going to sit here and beat Jake Browning up and say, oh, he is a terrible quarterback because he's not making all these reads and making perfect throws everywhere. And now, there's a lot of revisionist history of people saying, oh, Joe Burrow, if he was in there, he would have made that throw. Joe Burrow would have done this. Joe Burrow would have played way better. I mean, it's not like Joe Burrow played amazingly in the first two games before he got injured in the season. People are like so quick to overlook the fact that Joe Burrow didn't really play that well. And so it's not like Jake Browning is playing that much worse. The results are obviously worse in the two games that Jake Browning, but it's kind of not fair to Jake Browning. I'm not saying he's playing well, but there's so much negativity about Jake Browning. It's really, he can't block for himself. He can't play offensive line. He's not the guy running on these running plays where they're getting like less than 3 yards a carry. He's not necessarily helping the situation by making plays that would help the team win the game, but it's a team game. It's, he's doing his 1-11. So the offensive line, they're not holding up their end of the bargain. Bengals have the worst offensive line in the NFL. They have the worst offense, period, in the NFL. They have the worst running game. They have like 30 yards less running per game than the second to last team. Bengals are number 32. They're averaging 50 yards per game running the ball. Then the number 31 team is the Tennessee Titans. They're averaging 80 yards. So such a gap between the number 31 and number 32 teams. Bengals are in dead last by a mile. It's crazy how bad the Bengals are at running. Zac Taylor, and there's never any explanation. There's no anything from Zac Taylor. He just keeps saying, oh yeah, we'll keep sticking with it and find out our identity and making positive strides in the running, but it never changes. Nothing ever happens. They don't get any better. Part of it is they're not running that many plays. They can't stay on the field. They keep going 3 and out and then punting the ball away. So you can't get much running or passing yardage if you're never gaining any first downs, not moving the football, not conducive to racking up tons of yardage. And the Bengals have run the fewest plays. I want to say, if I check the next gen offensive stats, the Bengals have, yes, if for some reason it didn't load, but the Bengals are number 32 in total plays run on offense this season. They're at the bottom with 209. Next to them, the Ravens have run 210 plays. But the difference that stands out between those two is the Ravens have scored 15 offensive touchdowns. The Bengals have only scored 7 touchdowns. Similar story if you sort by expected points gained per play, EPA, expected points allowed per play. Bengals have negative 0.34, which is dead last again in the NFL, compared to the Buffalo Bills at number 1 with positive 0.18. The Detroit Lions are number 3 in EPA per play at positive 0.12. So the Lions, number 3 offensive attack, basically. And you can break it down by a lot of different metrics. But Lions have one of the most potent offenses in the league, and they're facing the Bengals, who are basically the most anemic offense in the league. Then if we look over at the defense, for the Bengals, it doesn't get a whole lot better in terms of EPA per play. I take that back. It depends on how you look at it. Some sites have it differently. They have the Bengals in terms of EPA per play at number 7 and the Lions at number 28. But in terms of yards against, yards allowed, let's look here. Lions are, let me flip this around. Lions are number 13. They're only allowing 200 yards passing per game. Bengals are allowing 262 yards passing per game, which is 30th in the league. And then if you look at rushing yards per game, Lions are pretty good at stopping the run. They're allowing 94 rushing yards against them per game. Bengals are allowing 135 yards rushing the ball against them on defense. If we look at kind of the team tiers, if you put it together on the offense and defensive EPA per play combined and rank the teams that way, the Bengals are in the bottom tier considerably. They're basically right next to the Tennessee Titans, who are 0-4. The Bengals are 2-2 in the record, and they're below somehow the Browns and the Saints in terms of overall EPA per play defensively and offensively. The Saints are somehow more effective on offense than the Bengals with Spencer Rattler at quarterback, and the Browns are a lot better than the Bengals defensively. Their Browns are neck and neck with the Bengals pretty much offensively in terms of ineptitude, and Joe Flacco just got benched. But it's either way you slice it, the Bengals are pretty much at the bottom of the league on offense and defense. And so that's not obviously leading to a lot of optimism about the Bengals and the rest of their season and the rest of these games. Anything is possible. You never know. I mean, look at the Ravens right now. The Ravens have a worse record than the Bengals. They're 1-3. Lamar Jackson pulled his hamstring. He's going to be out for the next couple weeks. So they have Cooper Rush, their backup quarterback, come in and play for the Ravens. And we'll have to see what happens with that. People are like, well, he's nothing like Lamar Jackson. And I heard people talking about, like, oh, the Ravens wish they had Shedeur Sanders. No, they do not. They definitely do not. If they wanted him, they would have drafted him. They don't need a quarterback who's like 0.5% as athletic as Lamar Jackson, but kind of tries to play like a slower, not as good Lamar Jackson. Nobody wanted Shedeur Sanders. So it's crazy that people are even discussing Shedeur Sanders. Like, who cares? He was not good in the preseason at all. That's why he's not playing. He is behind Joe Flacco as the number 3 quarterback on the Browns depth chart still. So even if Dylan Gabriel doesn't play well, they're just going to put Joe Flacco in. They're not going to put Shedeur Sanders for anything. The only reason that the Browns drafted him was because there's so many like people who are brainwashed by social media that they went out and bought his jersey and bought all kinds of merchandise from the Browns. So that was just an easy payday for the Browns, but they're never going to play him because he's terrible. But anyway, this isn't a Browns podcast, but the Bengals, they don't need a Shedeur Sanders. I'm glad they don't have anybody like that. They got a bunch of guys nobody is ever going to hear from. Nobody is going to cause any commotion if Mike White isn't starting, or why isn't Sean Clifford starting, or Brett Rippon. Nobody cares. And so that's part of the reason why I think people who make money on football and, have websites and YouTube shows and all that kind of stuff, that's why they talk about the Bengals and some veteran quarterback you've heard of, because nobody's ever heard of Brett Rippon. And if the conversation is, should the Bengals play Jake Browning or Brett Rippon, nobody's going to watch. Nobody's going to click on that because nobody cares. So they have to say, oh, should they sign Tom Brady out of retirement? Should they, bring back Cam Newton off of ESPN? All, people who are a name that you've heard of, but names that you've heard of aren't necessarily what the Bengals are looking for right now. What they're looking for is anybody who could play offensive line. If you've got, Willie Anderson, maybe he could come back out of retirement. But speaking of old Bengals, I said Willie Anderson, he's going to be up for the Hall of Fame. Ken Anderson, quarterback, is also going to be a nominee for the Hall of Fame this year. Again, he's been in that conversation a few times, hasn't got in, but the Bengals are looking for their next Hall of Fame inductee. They got Ken Riley to go along with Anthony Munoz. We'll see who the next one, like I said, Geno Atkins was in the consideration this year. It could happen. Maybe even Chad Ochocinco someday. I think he was pretty good. He was famous, for sure, one of the most famous football players of his era. You can't dispute that at all. And he was one of the best football players of his era. But those are the type of records and statistics Jamar Chase is after. I don't want to say chasing and make a bad pun, but Jamar Chase, T. Higgins is off to the slowest start of his career. Chase Brown is not living up to the expectations a lot of fantasy football owners had hyped him up all summer about. And just the team in general. I don't put a lot of stock in Pro Football Focus and their grades because, it's graded by people who never played football a lot of the time and who have never coached football and don't really know what the objective of the play is when it's called, but they're giving some kind of subjective grade to these people. Anyway, the point is, as much as I don't care about Pro Football Focus and I don't want to pay for a subscription, if you look at the overall team grade, every player gets a grade on every game, but then if you take all that, combine it, and give each team a cumulative grade, the Bengals, despite having a 2-2 win-loss record, are graded at number 31 out of 32 teams in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus. I don't know what the score is, but how they put it all together, if it's a weighted average, whatever it is, offense, defense, special teams, all added up, the Bengals are one of the worst graded teams. So any way you want to look at it, you want to look at it statistically, points, yards, grades, if you want to look at EPA, whatever metric you want to pull out, the Bengals are last or close to being dead last in like every category. And that's why people are saying, this Zac Taylor guy, he's been the coach here for 7 years, and maybe it's time to make a change. Obviously, the Bengals are loyal to a fault when it comes to players and coaches. They hung on to Marvin Lewis probably a couple seasons longer than they needed to, but he made the playoffs 5 seasons in a row. They didn't win any playoff games, but they made the playoffs. They're kind of like the less good Buffalo Bills of making it close but no cigar under Marvin Lewis. And they finally had enough of that, got rid of him, brought in Zac Taylor, and things got immediately worse. And then after a couple years, they got way better. They went to the Super Bowl, they went to the AFC Championship, and then back out of the playoffs. So of Zac Taylor's previous 6 seasons, they made the playoffs twice, missed the playoffs 4 times. But it seemed like every year that they didn't make the playoffs, there was some excuse. First year head coach, it'll take a while to implement his system, whatever. He doesn't have Marvin Lewis didn't leave him any good players left. AJ Green got hurt, whatever. They went 2-14 and got Joe Burrow the next season. Next season, they were going to be good, but Joe Burrow got injured. But they were already bad to begin with. It's not like they were winning most of the games with Joe Burrow in his rookie year. They were having a losing record even before Joe Burrow got hurt. Next 2 seasons, they make it to the playoffs. Great. Then, 2023, Joe Burrow got injured again, his wrist. Obviously, everybody gets a free pass, especially because they just went to back-to-back AFC championships. Okay, fine. Last season, then Joe Burrow, completely healthy, played every single game. It was the defense. Let's fire everybody on the defensive staff. It wasn't Zac Taylor. But when, Zac Taylor talks about accountability and taking responsibility and all that stuff, but he never takes any accountability for anything. He just keeps repeating the same things over and over about momentum. The thing that drives me so insane. They asked him in his press conference yesterday, when you went back and watched the film, that first drive, 4th and 2 at the Denver 8, why did you kick a field goal there? Because the Bengals ended up losing by 25 points, and they never got into scoring range again. So obviously, in hindsight, the decision would have been to go for it, to go for the touchdown, to try to score a touchdown and not kick a field goal and give up. Zac Taylor's response was just completely offhand of we just wanted to get some points, get some momentum. How does kicking a field goal give you momentum? Obviously it doesn't, because after that, they had absolutely zero momentum. They had 3 straight 3-and-out punts. They didn't score any more points. They didn't get barely any more yards. Broncos ran it up and down the field on the Bengals all game. So that stupid field goal did not give them any momentum. And this idea that somehow they can gain momentum or lose momentum in the game, from game to game, whatever, it doesn't exist. But that's what he's telling himself. That's what he's telling the players. And it's just a flawed concept. He's putting so much belief in something that doesn't exist. I mean, I can't even think of an analogy off the top of my head because it's so stupid. Trying to put all your faith in something that is non-existent. I mean, I don't want to get into a whole religious debate here, but you could think of all the things that don't exist that people really believe in. That's pretty much a waste of their time. So this obsession with momentum, they need to really just give it up and think, how can we win the game, and what do we need to do in this moment that's going to help us down the road? And it has nothing to do with momentum. Each play is independent of each other. And sometimes when things happen consecutively, like penalties on back-to-back plays, or they're losing back-to-back games, it feels like the momentum is going in the opposite direction. But there's nothing to say that they can't come out on Sunday and beat the Lions, who seemingly have all the momentum, and the Bengals have no momentum. None of that matters. the Bengals can go out and win the game, and they won't gain any more momentum after that either. Like, winning this one game isn't going to have positive or negative outcome necessarily on the next game. And you could say they'll have more confidence in themselves. Maybe after a win, they'll be more motivated to come in and study and work a little bit harder to get ready for that game. But there's no carryover between games. They just need to focus on winning this one game. It's going to be extremely difficult, and this is going to be a matchup between two head coaches who know each other well. Obviously, Zac Taylor was a coach on the staff with Dan Campbell with the Miami Dolphins. I think Dan Campbell was a tight ends coach, and then Zac Taylor was probably like a quarterbacks or something, wide receiver, probably quarterbacks coach with Ryan Tannehill, I think he was. And then Dan Campbell got the interim head coaching role. I don't know if Zac Taylor was on the coaching staff or if he was with Sean McVay with the Rams after that. He may have gotten fired before Dan Campbell was the interim head coach, but it's a long history between these two coaches. I'm sure Dan Campbell has a fair amount of respect for Zac Taylor, but probably not that much respect. But it's also going to be a matchup between the two draft pick options that a lot of people were evaluating, Jamar Chase or Penei Sewell. Penei Sewell is the right tackle for the Detroit Lions. A lot of people wanted to protect Joe Burrow, and obviously, the running game and the pass protection, if they had if they had Penei Sewell, would have been a lot better for Joe Burrow. But on the other hand, who would he be throwing it to? We haven't seen much out of T. Higgins. Andre Iosivas hasn't shown much. Charlie Jones is possibly injured. They said it was an ankle, I think, during the game on Monday where Mitch Tinsley was returning punts all of a sudden. But then Charlie Jones was listed on the injury report with an Achilles and did not practice on Wednesday. So that's going to be something to watch. Hopefully it's not anything serious, but an Achilles, you got to be careful with that kind of thing. And we did see Charlie Jones have a lingering groin injury that he had to have multiple surgeries on in the offseason. So it's going to be something to keep an eye on with Charlie Jones. We should see Noah Fant come back at tight end. He had a concussion last week and sat out. He looks like he's going to be on track to play this week. Cam Taylor-Britt was not listed on the injury report, and Ben Baby of ESPN asked Zac Taylor, since Cam Taylor-Britt was limited going into the game, was he limited during the game, or was it for performance reasons why he only played 5 plays? And Zac Taylor said something about, well, we have multiple guys that we feel good about at corner, and we felt like we could rotate them in to get the best performance. It was a whole lot of nothing. He basically didn't want to admit that they had benched Cam Taylor-Britt for playing like shit. So he just said, well, we feel really good about lots of guys. But they don't, he didn't say that about like Jake Browning. It was complete opposite. When they asked him about Jake Browning, he was like, 100%, I believe in Jake Browning. I have total unflappable confidence in Jake Browning. And then they asked him about Cam Taylor-Britt. It's, well, we got a lot of guys we could play at that position. I mean, Marco Wilson, Fig Newton, lots of guys, whoever we need out there. Night and day difference. So there was no confidence in Cam Taylor-Britt. And I mean, the way he was playing, who would have confidence in him? He looked like he was lost out there. He looked like he was just getting demoralized and beaten down by Courtland Sutton, who is a tough matchup. I'm not saying Courtland Sutton is an easy player to guard, but he was just making Cam Taylor-Britt look like a clown. And that's why he got pulled out after 5 plays. So who knows how long Cam Taylor-Britt is going to last in this game, if he plays at all. They might just leave him on the bench. But defense, I don't want to beat them up too bad, because on the other end of the spectrum, when I said offense has run the fewest plays out of any team in the NFL, the Bengals are right up there in terms of defense. Their defense has been on the field for the second most amount of plays, behind only the Ravens. So the Ravens and the Bengals are that goes hand in hand. Your defense is on the field more if your offense is not on the field. So the Bengals and the Ravens are leading the league in being on the field. Their defense can't get off the field. They've given up 13 touchdowns, tons of yards through the air and through the ground, and they're just not getting much of a pass rush. We have not seen the first-round pick, Shamar Stewart. He was battling that ankle injury, and it's not sounding good in terms of Shamar Stewart coming back and playing in Week 5. It sounds like, unless he suddenly gets a practice in later in the week, it's not looking like Shamar Stewart is going to be able to play in Week 5 either. So that's probably going to be his third game missed in his rookie season. The other guy is like Demetrius Knight, and he's been the only kind of positive, you might say, on the defense. He's leading the team in tackles, I believe, and he had his first interception in the game against the Broncos in the red zone. But he also kind of had a mental error on one of those Broncos touchdowns where he just didn't guard the running back out of the backfield, let him slip out, and he came in on the blitz, but he was not going to get there in time. Easy touchdown for the Broncos. So he's making tackles, but a lot of the times those tackles are 5 or 10 yards down the field when the running back or the receiver has already caught the pass and kind of had a breakout and gained a bunch of yards. Haven't been a ton of performances. Really, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody on the Bengals who really stands out where you could say this person consistently every game has played well. There have been a few players here and there who have had decent games, but nobody has had a great game all 4 games. Nobody has been consistently good, which is depressing. Honestly, it's depressing to think there's no hope. That's the thing that's hard. It's like, well, why even do this podcast at all? It could be worse. They could have lost all 4 of these games, and then there'd really be no hope. And that's the thing that kills podcasts. Is some of the podcasts I love are for teams that are terrible, and then all of a sudden their podcast hosts decide they don't want to host the podcast anymore. So I'm thinking about like the Panthers, the Jets. They haven't won any games. And unfortunately, a lot of those Panthers and Jets podcasts have completely dried up. Stop recording. They said, F this, I'm out. Because why waste your time recording a podcast talking about some team that's not putting a good product on the field? It's not really entertaining or watchable, and it's hard to spend so much time preparing and thinking about a team that sucks. I'm not there yet with this Bengals team. But again, I just want to see some kind of a fight. I don't care if the Lions beat them by 15, 20, whatever it is. I just want something entertaining to get excited about. Like, the thing about the Bengals is they're not just bad. They're boring. They can't, like, at least the Jets, they're scoring points. They're scoring 20, 27, 30 points a game. They're losing, but they're at least entertaining and exciting to watch. Panthers, they're bad, but at least they had that 30-0 shutout against the Falcons they can hang their hat on for a little bit. But then they're right back to being terrible, getting beat 42-16 against the Patriots. Browns, I'm never going to watch the Browns, so we don't have to worry about that. The point is, as a fan, as a podcaster, I want to have hope. I want the fans to have hope, but it's becoming increasingly difficult. And the coach is not doing anything to help add to the entertainment, add to the excitement. He's like the most boring coach in the universe. Nothing he says is interesting at all. I think he intentionally tries not to make a newsworthy quote. He doesn't want anything that he says to wind up on ESPN. Zac Taylor says, because we remember Zac Taylor says Jamar Chase will practice. And then the next day, Jamar Chase was not practicing at all. So anything Zac Taylor says is going to get thrown back in his face. I understand that. And people like me have the knives out for Zac Taylor. Anything he says, we want to just say, oh, that's not good enough, and it's an excuse. It's just a bunch of hot air, which it is. But he's in a no-win situation because he can't say anything that's going to make us feel better about watching those previous 2 games. We all have eyeballs. We all saw what happened. It doesn't really matter what the coach says. The results, the product was terrible. So this is what it's come to. It's week 5, and there's no Joe Burrow, and I'm just begging the team to be competitive and competent and entertaining and watchable. I just want to get excited to watch my team play and not have to suffer through another embarrassing loss. And I know it's frustrating for me. It's frustrating for fans. It was obviously frustrating for people like Ja'Marr Chase, who the story on the Monday Night Football was they showed the cameras, Ja'Marr Chase going up to Zac Taylor, not really like super animated and like shouting or anything, but just kind of saying something on the sidelines. Cameras picked it up and they made a big story about it. But after the game, they downplayed it, obviously. And I think it was just Ja'Marr Chase saying, like, why isn't the quarterback throwing me the ball? He was open multiple times. So I don't think he was necessarily mad at Zac Taylor, like, why aren't you calling plays to get me open, get me the ball? Zac Taylor was trying to get the ball to Ja'Marr Chase. He was getting open. It's just that Jake Browning wasn't seeing the field very well, wasn't making, which is surprising because you would think you would kind of have a highlight in the back of your mind every play, where's Ja'Marr Chase? And for whatever reason, Jake Browning wasn't focused in on Ja'Marr as much as he needed to be when it was weird how he would pick plays to kind of force it to Ja'Marr when he happened to be double covered, but then when Ja'Marr was wide open, he would like miss him. So it's just, they got to get those flipped around where he's looking at him when Jamar's open and don't throw it to him when Jamar's in like triple coverage. I know easier said than done, but it is possible. Like they could, I'm not saying they're going to win, but they could at least be in the game. Is that so much to ask? Apparently it's too much to ask for this Bengals team. I mean, if they're not competitive, then just go all the way the other direction. Just like lose by 50, just be like the historically worst team ever. And then that would at least be something to talk about, something interesting, like, man, how bad this team is. Can you believe it? But when they're just kind of like bad and nobody cares, then that's the worst. So Bengals either win or just get blown away by 50. That's what I'm asking for, I guess. But either way, it turns out, good, bad, or indifferent, we'll be back to discuss it on the next episode. So if you've listened all the way, let me know what you think in the comments. Give me a subscribe, thumbs up, send me an email, bengalbitespodcast@gmail.com. Maybe I'll read it on the show. But until next time, I'm going to leave you with a hooday and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.